Hello everyone, and thank you once again for engaging with this video series for the unit. It has been a little while since I posted a video, mostly because I've been very busy with my own work and marking, but also because I presume that you would also be busy submitting assessment 1. And I have received all those files now, so thank you for submitting before the due date or on the due date. And I'll be marking those over the next couple of weeks, so there'll be a 2-week turnaround there. So not this coming Friday, but next Friday I'll release those assignments to you. You'll know your grade and you'll see the comments, etc. On your papers. So this video, probably be relatively short, will cover the topic of assessment. Now, I guess unlike some other aspects of this unit, which are more contextual and covering a breadth of knowledge and ideas around teaching as a profession, some of these smaller topics, these weekly topics, assessment being this particular one, it's very much this notion of dipping your toe into the waters of the various aspects of teachers' practice that you need to start considering as you move forward in the masters. And they focus around particular skills or practices that teachers do every day, and they're the kinds of demonstrable skills that you'll need to ensure that you are coming to terms with, but also being able to use these things out in the classroom when you do your professional practice down the line. So let's just consider briefly assessment. Now, I would say assessment in regards to teacher practice and certain kinds of assessment are particularly political, and there's a lot of stuff in the media around assessment practices, most particularly standardized testing and the NAPLAN test. And not that I don't want to talk about that, but I think it's important for this particular topic that you don't simply think about or read about or consider in your reflections, in your writings, etc., simply about the stuff in regards to assessment that is the more political, controversial things that are going on in schools. I think an important question to ask is, yes, okay, when does assessment not work so well, and when does it seem to have detrimental effects to students, to teachers, which we can certainly see in the literature around the standardized test like NAPLAN. But when does assessment work well? I think that's a really important question to consider it at this early stage. What does good assessment look like? That's a critical notion to explore for yourself. I think it's easy for us to debate and to think and to wave the finger at the government around the NAPLAN test. And again, not to say that I certainly engage in that, and I'm the first person in conversations with friends or neighbours when we talk about schooling. I'll often go to NAPLAN quite quickly and say, talk about my negative attitudes towards that particular practice in our schools today. But rather than dwell on that, I think there's lots of stuff you can read around the NAPLAN test and what's going on there, and maybe even think about also the rigours of the ATAR test, the examination process of year 11s and 12s. I think that's also a big issue that we can explore. But for the time being, I think, and certainly where the reading this week in Clark and Pittaway focus is starting to understand what is it that teachers actually do when we think about effective assessment or good assessment practices. And thinking about, well, if I'm going to be assessing students' learning, okay, what does that look like? And how do I do it well? And how do I do it that's meaningful, that's relevant to the content that I'm teaching, to the outcomes that I'm plugging into, say, my lessons. So if we just take that singular 60-minute lesson, you think about the outcomes that you're writing to achieve in that lesson. So you may be wanting students to draw or describe or explain or investigate or research or whatever you're doing. How do I, as a teacher, know that the students have actually done that? Well, I have to do some form of assessment. And a test an objective test, as Clark and Pittaway talk about, and I guess I'll sort of range over, if we just flick to that good table here, which covers all the bases around the different things that teachers do in regards to assessment. An objective test with questions and then space for the students to write their answers in is simply one form of assessment, and it's actually it's a narrow form of assessment because it's asking for something very specific. It's and you get something very specific out of it. There's not a lot of flexibility in tests necessarily. So assessments can be highly flexible and directed by the students, all the way to highly prescribed by the teacher, and objective tests are highly prescribed. But tests can be done in a effective, meaningful way. I think over-testing is a big problem. But when we consider again about good assessment practices of teachers and experienced teachers and what they do, a lot of assessment isn't necessarily formal, like a test. A lot of assessment that quite experienced teachers do, and when you go out into schools, and I do hope that you see very experienced, effective teachers in their practice, you'll find that their assessment techniques are daily, even minute by minute in the classroom. So a perfect example, and the reading goes into this, is a form of diagnostic assessment that teachers have to deploy with a group of learners, and they may even be familiar, a group of learners that the teacher knows and has worked with over a period of weeks or months, but they're coming at a new bit of the content, and that teacher may not be 100% sure what has been covered in previous years, even in primary school. So that teacher has to undergo a form of diagnostic assessment. They have to understand, well, what's the prior learning that has occurred? As a teacher, I can do that in a number of ways. A very simple way to do it is simply posing some questions to the group, a bit of a Q&A, and it's initiate a discussion, give your students some prompts, some clues, maybe something on to present them, whether it's an image or a formula or a problem or a statement, a quote, and see what their response is. Have you seen this before? What do you understand about this? What's your thinking around this? Can anyone tell me words that jump to your mind when you see this, or when you read this, or when you think about this problem? So the teacher will then get a sense of what has been learned before, and a group of 30 learners, for example, in Year 9, range all over the board there. There may be some students that have a lot of prior understanding and learning, and there may be students with none. And then the teacher has to then make some decisions based on that information and particular program of work at a particular pace. They're going to work through the preceding concepts and skills and learning design from there. So that's assessment. It's assessing what students have already learned, even though you're not assigning a mark or a grade. Because again, assigning a mark or a grade to a piece of work is an objective way. It's a very formalized way of gauging what a student knows. And again, this table, if we look at this table, we can see there that there is a number of techniques that teachers use, from informal observing all the way to testing, as I've mentioned. That they take diagnostic forms, they take formative forms, and they take summative forms. And it's important to know the difference. I mean, for me, I always think summative meaning a summation, so it's something that happens at the end, and formative sort of happens during. That's the way that I like to think about those two different kinds of assessment types. But as this table rightly shows, you can have objective tests at the very beginning to diagnose what students have learned. You can have objective tests during the learning and at the end of the learning, just like you can have all different kinds of assessments, going from interviews to self-reports to logbooks and portfolios, records, checklists, etc., etc. I think a really critical point around assessment from this very early stage is understanding that assessment and good assessment is long form and is varied. So assessments occur all the time in a teaching and learning program, and there's variety there. There's a variety of different things that teachers do to ensure they have a good understanding of what a particular individual can and cannot do. And from that, they can then assign the more objective measure of a mark or a grade. So a single test does not become the determining factor of what a student can or cannot do. Hence, the big problem with NAPLAN is that so much emphasis has been placed on a singular assessment. Yes, they occur periodically for the same individual, but nonetheless, and they're not teacher written, they're written by outside agencies that create the test. So the standardized nature of the NAPLAN is so removed from what we consider about good assessment practice, that it's long form, it's varied, it occurs all the time, and it tells us different things. Assessments should tell us different things about students and different things that they can do, different things that they can't do, and then where we target our teaching as a result. The NAPLAN test is a measurement. It's not necessarily an assessment, so that there's actually a difference there. NAPLAN's very good at measuring something. Assessment is much broader. Assessment is much richer. It should be much richer than simply a measurement. So that's one of the fundamental problems with any standardized test. Is it's simply an objective measurement of a student's performance, whereas good assessment practice is should be rich, holistic, and focused around the teacher's professional judgments. That includes the student's participation. So again, and you see it, I hope you go into schools where you see this happening, good assessment practice, but teachers, quite common practice now in all sorts of different subject areas, students get a choice about the kinds of ways they wish to demonstrate what they know. So say there are 3 options in a particular research project that a student can follow. So 3 pathways that are all they similar but different enough. So students can focus on the kinds of skills they wish to pursue, they wish to develop, and can display or demonstrate what they know in different ways. So that's a very common practice now, particularly in lower school, but it happens in upper school as well. Coming back to the NAPLAN, there are no divergent pathways in the NAPLAN. There is only one way that you must demonstrate what you know in a particular question set. So again, where is the student participation there? There is none. Students don't have a choice to participate in ways that are enriching for them. So, and again, if you go to some schools, certainly I guess more out of the mainstream, students get even more freedom and choice in which they can follow their own projects, and they can may go over months in which they are building this project that they're following, and there's been some success in schools around that, in a kind of democratization of the assessment process to the extreme of students can make ultimate decisions about how they want to be assessed and what they want to learn. So again, this is talking about rich assessment as opposed to standardized, dry, forced assessment practices that tend to be quite popular, because they're popular not for teachers, but they're popular for the system. The system has engineered them in a particular way, because for the system, the broader system being the whole school system across a state or across the country, it can provide a lot of information by which to make decisions. Much like teachers who conduct their own assessment practices, they need the information in which to make decisions about students' progress, for example. So who is a top performing, who is an A student, and who is not performing at the particular level that's required there. They can't demonstrate the skills or the knowledge yet. So a teacher's own pragmatic concerns around the fact they need to do reports means that they must make certain choices around assessment to give them a rich picture of each individual student. So then they can say, yes, that student is an A because I conducted a portfolio assessment, I conducted this research task, I conducted this test, I conducted this short answer in class question, whatever the case is. So all of that varied evidence that the teacher then gathers, then they can make their professional judgment around the particular grade to assign that student. So you have there, a direct correlation between a teacher's own pragmatic concerns about what work they have to complete around reporting to the decisions they make in regards to assessment. But if we look at the whole system, it's much more difficult to do that kind of varied evidence. They need an objective measurement that they can make objective decisions about when we're talking the huge numbers game that departments of education or the federal government plays around with. We're talking millions of individuals that they're trying to shuffle around and think about, how do we decide how to shape our curriculum to meet the skills of the 21st century, etc., etc. So again, I hope this shorter video, so we're going to end it there, has just kind of, again, made you think about this topic of assessment in new ways, and as you consider and move forward, because as you work with other units in the Masters, you'll be focusing on assessment in much greater depth. So coming at it, again, just with that critical approach, thinking about what is really going on here. The technical pragmatic concerns are important about how do I start to consider my own choices around assessment and how do I conduct good, effective, rich, meaningful assessment. But as well then, what is going on a broader level, on a state-based or federal-based level with regards to these standardized assessments? What do they mean? What effects do they have in schools and in classrooms, and what effects do they have on the students in which I engage with and I have responsibility over? Certainly if you're a maths or English teacher, the effects will be massive. You will really have to come to terms with the fact that you will be delivering, if you've got a year 9 class, you'll be delivering NAPLAN in maths or English if you're that subject teacher. So what's your approach? And do you toe the line, so to speak, in regards to the school policy with NAPLAN preparation, for example, and what happens if parents or students talk about not wanting to do it or opting out, or and how do you deal with those challenges? So it's something you do have to come around to and really engage with. And even if you're not a maths or English teacher, you'll see that NAPLAN focuses everything and everyone in the school when it's delivered and when the results come out, because a lot gets determined from where those students sit in those bands. So certainly if you're going out into schools, ask questions, don't be critical in those questions, but say, how does the school approach NAPLAN preparation? Where's the data on the students in regards to their NAPLAN results, and what decisions are made about those results in regards to teachers' practice or streaming in the school or whatever. So, just ask questions, gather information, then you can start to make your own informed opinion and choices around how you're going to approach such practices. So, again, I hope this has been useful. Later in the week, I'll be posting some videos, lengthier, no doubt, because the whole social, emotional, teacher resilience stuff is very much falls into my own research, my own PhD, so I'm likely to talk for a while, a couple of videos at least on that topic, but I hope this one has been interesting, and again, thank you for engaging.